In the quiet garden of a mansion, a street boy faces the pleading gaze of a man in a wheelchair. "Heal my legs, and all my fortune will be yours," says the businessman, desperate for one final miracle. Trapped between compassion and fear, the boy realizes his freedom is being bargained. But from an offer that once seemed selfish, a new path is born, one capable of healing not just bodies but forgotten souls. The icy pre-dawn New York City wind cut like a razor as Gabriel, a boy of just 8 years, huddled under the awning of St. Patrick's Cathedral. His bare feet and tattered t-shirt offered little protection against the cold that punished the city during that harsh winter. Gabriel pulled the grimy blanket he had found in the trash days ago closer to his body. His only defense against the temperature that was dropping to alarming levels. When the first rays of sun began to tint the metropolis's grey sky, Gabriel was already awake. Sleep never came easily on the streets. Every noise, every shadow could mean danger. He had learned that in the 6 months since his father, Jonathan, had abandoned him in front of the Port Authority bus terminal with the false promise that he would be right back. He never saw him again. Of his mother, he only kept vague memories of screams and crying before she completely disappeared from his life when he was 4. "Good morning, New York," Gabriel said to himself, a ritual he maintained so as not to forget the sound of his own voice. With agile movements, he stored his treasure, a broken toothbrush, a plastic spinning top, and a crumpled photo of him smiling next to his father, in a torn backpack he carried everywhere. The city center was beginning to stir. Shopkeepers opened their stores. Hurried executives walked by, staring at their cell phones, completely ignoring little Gabriel's existence. To them, he was just another street kid, invisible in the urban landscape. Following his daily routine, Gabriel walked to a bakery on Maiden Lane. The smell of fresh bread made his stomach rumble painfully. "Aunt Marlene, good morning." He smiled upon seeing the counter lady who, every now and then, would give him a roll or a glass of milk. "Gabriel, child, you're getting thinner every day. Here, take this." Marlene looked from side to side, making sure the owner wasn't around, and handed him a small bag with a cheese roll and a cup of hot chocolate. "Eat it quick before Mr. Paul gets here." Gabriel devoured the food as if it were the last meal of his life. He thanked Marlene with a quick hug and headed off to his job. Near 5th Avenue, the little boy offered to wash windshields at traffic lights or carry shopping bags in exchange for a few coins. It was on a Thursday afternoon, when the sun had finally given a respite, that Gabriel's destiny changed forever. In front of Rockefeller Center, an imposing black Mercedes-Benz stopped at a red light. In the driver's window, Gabriel saw the stern face of a man who looked like a statue, so motionless was he. "Mister, want me to wash your windshield?" "It's pretty dirty." The driver didn't even blink, as if Gabriel didn't exist. But in the back seat, another pair of eyes was watching him. They belonged to Richard Miles, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, owner of Miles Development, a real estate empire that stretched across the United States. Richard, at 58, had been confined to a wheelchair for 3 years, the result of an accident in his private helicopter. The constant pain had turned him into a bitter man who treated everyone harshly. The world's best specialists had failed to restore movement to his legs or completely alleviate the torment that consumed him day and night. "Kid, get out of the way." The driver finally spoke as the light turned green, but Richard, in an unusual gesture, lowered the tinted window. "Wait, Thaddeus," he ordered the driver. Then he addressed Gabriel. "Boy, do you have a place to sleep?" Gabriel hesitated. He had been tricked before by people offering help. "I do, sir. I sleep over in the park. There's a good piece of cardboard there." Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Compassion. Or was it desperation? After spending millions on ineffective treatments, perhaps he was ready to believe in anything, even a miracle from the streets. "Get in the car," he ordered. Opening the door wider, Gabriel took a step back, suspicious. "I'm not going to hurt you," Richard softened his tone. "I have a proposal. You will have food and a place to sleep." Gabriel's stomach rumbled again as if answering for him. Cautiously, he entered the luxurious vehicle, feeling completely out of place amidst the leather and fine wood. What Gabriel could not imagine was that, by getting into that car, he was leaving his life on the streets behind, but walking into a different kind of prison. During the drive to the mansion on the Upper East Side, Richard observed the boy with curiosity. There was something different about him, a light in his eyes that seemed to defy all the misery that surrounded him. "What's your name, kid?" "Gabriel, sir." "Gabriel? Like the angel?" Richard smiled for the first time in months. Perhaps it's a sign. The car stopped in front of an imposing gate. Gabriel's eyes widened as he saw the mansion that was revealed before him. It looked like a palace out of the storybooks he used to flip through in the midtown bookstores when he could get in without being kicked out. "Welcome to your new home, Gabriel," said Richard. "From today on, you will live here with me." The boy didn't know if he should feel fear or gratitude. Why would this rich and important man take him to his house? What did he want from him? When Thaddeus opened the car door and took the wheelchair out of the trunk to help Richard, Gabriel noticed the expression of pain on the businessman's face. It was an inexplicable impulse that led him to touch Richard's shoulder and murmur words that even he didn't fully understand. "God will take care of you, sir. I'm going to pray for you to get better." At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Richard felt a warmth spread through his body and, for a brief instant, the chronic pain that tormented him subsided. His eyes widened in astonishment. Did you do that?" he asked, incredulous. Gabriel just shrugged, not understanding the man's reaction. "Do what, sir?" But Richard was already convinced. He had found something far more valuable than all the experimental treatments he had tried. Perhaps this dirty boy, abandoned by society, was the miracle he had been waiting for. "Come, Gabriel. I have big plans for us." And so, hand in hand with the unknown, Gabriel passed through the mansion's gate, unaware that there he would begin a journey that would transform not only his life, but also those of thousands of other children like him. What the little boy didn't imagine was that before liberation would come captivity, and that his gift, still misunderstood, would be both his prison and his salvation. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the Miles mansion seemed to swallow Gabriel with its grandeur. Italian marble floors, paintings by famous artists on the walls, crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings, a world completely opposite to the cold sidewalks of Washington Square Park. As he walked through the endless corridors, the boy felt even smaller, almost invisible amidst so much luxury. "Mrs. Constance," Richard's voice echoed through the mansion. "Come meet our new guest." A middle-aged black woman with grey hair tied in a bun and a kind gaze appeared in the main hall. She had worked for the Miles family for over 20 years, a silent witness to Richard's transformation from an ambitious young man to a man embittered by pain and loneliness. "This is Gabriel," Richard introduced. "He will be living with us from today. Prepare the guest room on the second floor and arrange for new clothes, the best ones. I also want him to have a bath and a proper meal." Mrs. Constance looked at the boy with tenderness. In her nearly 50 years of life, she had seen many things, including her employer's whims. But bringing a street kid into the mansion was unprecedented even for Richard Miles. "Come with me, little one," she said, extending her hand. "We'll take care of you." Gabriel held Mrs. Constance's calloused hand, feeling instantly safer. There was genuine kindness in that woman, something he recognized by instinct after years of distinguishing dangers on the streets. The room designated for Gabriel was larger than any place he had ever slept. A king-size canopy bed, enormous closets, a flat-screen TV, and even a private bathroom with a bathtub. Everything seemed to be out of a dream. First a nice hot bath, then a home-cooked meal, Mrs. Constance decided. "And look at these sores on your feet. They'll take care of those too." During the bath, Gabriel let years of dirt and suffering wash down the drain. The old clothes were discarded, except for the backpack with his treasures, which he refused to abandon. Dressed in pajamas too soft for his body accustomed to roughness, he sat at the kitchen table, where Mrs. Constance served rice, beans, steak, and salad. "Eat slowly, my child. The food isn't going to run away," she advised, seeing the boy devour everything as if it were his last meal. Meanwhile, in the mansion's office, Richard was making frantic calls. "Cancel all my appointments for this week," he ordered his secretary. Then he called his private physician. "Dr. Oliver, I need you to come to my house immediately. It's urgent." The doctor arrived in less than an hour, finding Richard restless in his wheelchair. "What happened, Mr. Miles? Are you feeling unwell again?" "On the contrary," Richard replied with a strange glint in his eyes. For the first time in 3 years, I felt a relief from the pain. And it was thanks to a street kid. Dr. Oliver frowned. He was well aware of the effects of chronic pain on his patients' mental health, and the desperation that led them to believe in any possibility of a cure. Richard, we need to discuss alternative treatments, but I suggest caution with— I'm not delusional, Doctor, Richard interrupted. I want you to examine the boy. There's something special about him, I can feel it. When he touched my shoulder and prayed, the pain just subsided. The doctor agreed, more to calm his patient than because he believed the story. After examining Gabriel, who was already sleeping soundly after his bath and meal, he found nothing extraordinary, just the typical signs of a child who had lived in extreme vulnerability: malnutrition, small scars, dental cavities. He's just an ordinary boy, Richard. I suggest you refer him to Child Protective Services tomorrow. He stays, the businessman decreed. Something tells me this boy is my last hope. In the days that followed, Gabriel began to understand that his new life had a price. Richard demanded his constant presence, repeatedly asking him to place his hands on his shoulders and pray. The businessman meticulously recorded each session, noting small improvements that might have been just a product of his desperate imagination. The only true comfort for Gabriel came from Mrs. Constance. In the hours when Richard was busy with phone calls or virtual meetings, she taught the boy to read better, told him stories, and treated him with the motherly affection he had never known. You have a good heart, child, she would say while helping him with his lessons. That's what Mr. Richard sees in you, even if he doesn't quite understand it yet. A week after Gabriel's arrival, the mansion's routine was disturbed by the unexpected arrival of 2 visitors: Augustus Miles, Richard's younger brother, and Claudia, the businessman's ex-wife. So the rumor is true, Augustus said upon seeing Gabriel sitting next to Richard's wheelchair in the living room. My brother has actually adopted a street kid. I haven't adopted anyone, Richard replied curtly. Gabriel is my guest. Claudia, an elegant woman in her 50s, approached the boy with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. How cute. But Richard, darling, you've never been interested in charity. What is this boy really doing here? Gabriel sensed the tension in the air. Augustus examined him as if he were an insect, while Claudia barely disguised her contempt under a thin layer of false sympathy. My reasons are none of your business, Richard answered. Gabriel stays, and that's final. Later, when they thought they were alone on the back porch, Gabriel accidentally overheard the conversation between Augustus and Claudia. He's completely lost his mind, Augustus was saying. Bringing a street urchin into the house, risking everyone's safety. Who knows what this kid will steal? What's more concerning is that Richard seems obsessed, Claudia replied. I heard from the staff that he believes the boy has healing powers. Can you imagine? Our ex-husband, one of the most rational men I've ever known, now believing in miracles. We need to keep an eye on this, Augustus decided. If he's going senile, we have to act before he compromises the family business. I have plans for Miles' development that don't include seeing our assets squandered on superstitions. Gabriel felt a shiver run down his spine. In just a few days, he had understood enough about his situation. He was both a prisoner and a source of hope. Richard was keeping him in the mansion not out of kindness, but out of desperation. And now there were people who saw him as a threat. That night he tried to run away. He gathered his few belongings and waited for everyone to fall asleep to escape through the back of the property. But when he reached the garden, he found Thaddeus, the driver, who also served as security. Where do you think you're going, kid? I want to go back to the street, Gabriel answered with tears in his eyes. At least there I was free. Thaddeus took him back to his room, informing Richard of the escape attempt. The next morning, bars were installed on Gabriel's bedroom windows for his protection, according to the businessman. The prison was now literal, not just metaphorical. 2 weeks passed. Richard's health seemed to gradually improve. He could endure longer periods without pain medication, and even his doctors noted positive, albeit inexplicable, signs. It's him, Richard insisted to Dr. Oliver. The boy is healing me. Gabriel, for his part, became increasingly withdrawn. The daily healing sessions exhausted him emotionally. He didn't understand what Richard expected of him, nor why his simple prayers seemed to have such an effect on the businessman. He only opened up to Mrs. Constance. "I'm not special," he confessed to her one night, while they were having hot chocolate in the kitchen. "I just pray like my mom taught me before she left. I don't know how to do miracles." "Sometimes, my child, the greatest miracle is simply to believe," the lady replied wisely. "And you made Mr. Richard believe again. In that, perhaps, lies your true gift." What none of them could imagine was that Gabriel's faith would be put to the test very soon, in a way no one could have predicted, and that the first true miracle would not happen to Richard Miles, but to someone much closer to the boy's heart. A month had passed since Gabriel's arrival at the Miles mansion. The New York autumn tinted the garden trees with golden and reddish hues, creating a contrast with the grey of the high walls surrounding the property. For Gabriel, those walls represented both protection and prison. The routine in the mansion was rigid. In the mornings, Richard underwent physical therapy sessions, always with Gabriel by his side. In the afternoons after lunch, it was time for the healing sessions, moments when the businessman demanded that the boy place his hands on his paralyzed legs and pray. At night, doctors visited the mansion to assess Richard's progress, who insisted he was feeling gradual improvements. Gabriel didn't understand how his simple prayers could help someone as powerful as Richard Miles. On the streets, he prayed for food and protection. His prayers were rarely answered. Why would they be different now? The only peaceful moments for the boy were the hours spent with Mrs. Constance, the housekeeper. Noticing how deprived Gabriel was of a normal childhood, created small spaces of joy in the suffocating daily life of the mansion. "Today we're making chocolate fudge balls," she announced on a rainy afternoon, while Richard was in a video conference in his office. "Every American boy needs to know how to make the world's best treat." Gabriel smiled for the first time in days. His small hands helped mix the chocolate with the condensed milk, while Mrs. Constance told stories of her childhood in the Carolinas. "My grandmother used to say that food made with love has healing power," she commented, watching the boy lick the spoon with pleasure. "Maybe that's what you do, Gabriel. You put love into your prayers." "Do you really think I can heal people, Mrs. Constance?" The housekeeper hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I believe there are things in this world that science can't yet explain. Faith is one of them." That same night after dinner, an incident would forever change the course of events in the mansion. While serving coffee to Richard in the living room, Mrs. Constance suddenly clutched her chest, dropped the tray and fell to the floor, unable to breathe properly. "Help!" Gabriel screamed, rushing to the housekeeper's side. "Mrs. Constance is sick." Richard immediately called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived in minutes, an advantage of living in an affluent New York neighborhood, and diagnosed an acute heart attack. Mrs. Constance was rushed to Mount Sinai Hospital, where she was taken directly to the ICU in critical condition. That night was the longest of Gabriel's life. Sitting alone in his room, he prayed as he had never prayed before. Not for Richard, not for himself, but for the only person who had shown him true affection in years. "Please, God, don't take her away," he whispered through tears. "She's the only one who really likes me." The next morning, Gabriel begged Richard to take him to the hospital. "I need to see Mrs. Constance." "Please, Mr. Richard." The businessman initially refused, fearing to expose Gabriel to the outside world and lose his private miracle. But something in the boy's genuine desperation moved him. "Thaddeus will take you," he finally relented. "But only for an hour, and you can't talk about what we do here." At the hospital, Gabriel found Mrs. Constance intubated, surrounded by machines that beeped at regular intervals. The doctors had told Richard that her condition was extremely serious, with little chance of a full recovery. Thaddeus stood outside the room, giving Gabriel a few moments of privacy with the housekeeper. The boy approached the bed, gently touching Mrs. Constance's hand. "I'm here," he said softly. "You're going to get better, I know it." And then, as he had done so many times with Richard, Gabriel placed his hands on Mrs. Constance and began to pray. They were not elaborate words or formal prayers, just the sincere plea of a child for his only friend not to leave. A nurse passing by in the hallway witnessed the scene and, impressed by the boy's devotion, allowed him to stay longer than authorized. When Thaddeus finally came to get him, Gabriel kissed Mrs. Constance's forehead and promised to return. What no one expected was that the next morning, the housekeeper would wake up without the need for ventilation, with stable vital signs and asking for Gabriel. The doctors couldn't explain the sudden improvement. The tests showed that the heart damage had significantly decreased from one day to the next, something practically impossible according to medical literature. When the news reached the mansion, Richard was euphoric. "You see," he exclaimed to Dr. Oliver, his personal physician, "it's not a coincidence. First me, now Constance. The boy has a gift." The doctor, a man of science by training, was beginning to question his own convictions. Although reluctant to admit supernatural possibilities, he could not deny the accumulating evidence. "I'll request new tests for Mrs. Constance," he said, still trying to maintain professional skepticism. There must be some medical explanation. Meanwhile, in the staff quarters, Augustus was talking to Jordana, one of the newly hired maids who was actually working as his informant inside the mansion. "So the kid went to visit the old woman in the hospital yesterday?" "Yes, sir," Jordana replied. "And this morning I got a message saying Mrs. Constance has miraculously improved. The doctors are baffled." Augustus frowned, visibly disturbed by the information. "This is not good," he muttered. "If this story gets out, Richard will become even more obsessed with the boy." "There's more, sir. I heard Mr. Richard on the phone with a major network. It seems he's considering giving an exclusive interview about his own recovery." That was the limit. Augustus could not allow his brother to expose the family to public ridicule over superstitions. Besides, if Richard really did recover completely, his plans to take control of Miles' development would be threatened. "Call Claudia immediately," he ordered. "We need to act fast." In another corner of the mansion, Gabriel received the news of Mrs. Constance's recovery with tears of joy. For the first time, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, his prayers really did have some power. Richard, observing the boy's reaction, felt a pang of guilt for having kept him practically in captivity. In an unusual gesture of generosity, he offered him a gift. "Gabriel, pick a toy online, anyone you want." The boy, accustomed to scarcity, was stunned by the offer. "Anyone at all, Mr. Richard?" "Yes, you deserve a reward for what you did for Constance." After a few hours of browsing the internet with the help of Marshall, Richard's personal assistant, Gabriel chose not an expensive video game or a trendy cell phone, but something that surprised everyone: a telescope. "I want to see the stars," he explained simply. "On the street, I used to look at them every night and imagine what it would be like to get up there." The request moved even Richard, who ordered the purchase of the best telescope available on the market. When the equipment arrived 2 days later, it was installed on the balcony of Gabriel's room. He spent hours observing the New York night sky, despite the light pollution that obscured many stars. Mrs. Constance was discharged from the hospital a week later, returning to the mansion like a celebrity. The staff, initially skeptical of the stories about Gabriel's gift, now looked at the boy with a mixture of admiration and fear. Some even discreetly asked him to bless photos of sick relatives. The housekeeper's recovery brought a significant change to the house's dynamics. Richard, increasingly convinced of Gabriel's power, paradoxically became more flexible about the restrictions imposed on the boy. The bars on the window were removed, and Gabriel was allowed to roam freely in the mansion's gardens, always under discreet surveillance, of course. "The boy needs to feel comfortable," Richard explained to Dr. Oliver. "I've noticed that when he's happy, his gift seems stronger." The doctor, still reluctant to accept supernatural explanations, suggested a more scientific approach. "We could run some controlled tests," he proposed, perhaps in partnership with some colleagues from Columbia University. "No," Richard rejected the idea immediately. "No turning Gabriel into a lab rat. He is special. I want to protect him." What Richard wouldn't admit, not even to himself, was that his interest in protecting Gabriel had much more to do with keeping his personal miracle away from prying eyes than with the boy's well-being. Meanwhile, in Claudia's luxury apartment in Soho, she and Augustus were plotting to discredit Gabriel and distance him from Richard. "I've hired a private investigator," Augustus informed her. "He's looking for the kid's biological family. If we find his parents, we can use them to get him out of the mansion." "And if we don't?" Claudia questioned, distractedly swirling the wine in her glass. "We have to have a plan B." "I'm preparing a dossier to file for a conservatorship over Richard," Augustus revealed. I'll argue that he is mentally unstable, obsessed with faith healing and exploiting a minor. Claudia smiled, satisfied. As Richard's ex-wife, she still held substantial shares in Miles' development. A court-ordered conservatorship would mean direct control over the business and over the billion-dollar fortune. What none of them knew was that their plans would soon face an unexpected obstacle. The story of Gabriel and Richard was about to break through the mansion walls and enter the public domain, triggering a series of events that no one could predict or control. The news broke on a sunny Tuesday in spring. "Street kid with miraculous powers kept in businessman's mansion," announced the headline of the country's most visited news portal. The report, by investigative journalist Deborah Alvarez, contained surprisingly accurate details about Gabriel, his arrival at the Miles mansion, and the supposed miracles performed. Internal sources confirm that Richard Miles, CEO of Miles Development, believes he has been partially healed by a boy of just 8, rescued from the streets of New York, the text read. The most recent case allegedly involves the family's housekeeper, who miraculously recovered from a heart attack after a visit from the boy at the hospital. Within hours, the Upper East Side mansion was surrounded by television news vans, journalists with microphones, and curious onlookers crowding the sidewalk. Helicopters flew over the property, trying to capture images of Gabriel in the gardens or through the windows. Richard was furious. Who had leaked this information? His initial suspicion fell on Dr. Oliver, but the doctor swore his innocence. Then he thought of the staff. Any one of them could have been tempted by the sensationalist press's money. "I don't want anyone talking to the press," he roared during an emergency meeting with his security team. "Anyone caught giving information will be immediately fired and prosecuted." Gabriel watched everything with a mixture of fascination and terror. From his bedroom window, he saw the crowd grow with each passing hour. Some people held signs with messages like, "Gabriel, pray for my son," or "We want a miracle." Others displayed banners accusing Richard of kidnapping and child exploitation. Mrs. Constance, now recovered, tried to shield the boy from the chaos. "Don't pay any attention to these people, my child," she said, closing the curtains in his room. "They're just curious. They'll get tired and go away soon." But the housekeeper knew it wouldn't be that simple. Gabriel's story had all the elements the American public loved: mystery, religion, the contrast between poverty and wealth, the possibility of miracles in an increasingly cynical world. That same afternoon, New York's Child Protective Services sent representatives to the mansion, demanding to verify the conditions in which Gabriel was living. Richard, advised by his legal team, allowed the visit but limited access to only the boy's room and the common areas of the house. "How are you being treated here, Gabriel?" asked Martha Gomez, the CPS caseworker, when they were finally alone in the room. Gabriel hesitated. Throughout his life on the streets, he had learned to distrust authorities. Besides, despite the initial restrictions, his life in the mansion was infinitely better than the one he had before. "I'm fine," he finally replied. "I have food, a bed, Mrs. Constance takes care of me. And can you leave whenever you want? Do you have contact with other children?" The boy looked down. "There were bars on the window at first, but not anymore. I can walk in the garden." The caseworker made detailed notes, also observing the expensive toys and designer clothes scattered around the room. Signs of material comfort, but not necessarily of emotional well-being. "Gabriel, you know you can't be kept here against your will, right? If you want to leave, we can take you to a proper shelter until we find a family for you." The word family caused a tightness in the boy's chest. His only family experience had been marked by abandonment and rejection. The idea of being handed over to strangers was as frightening as returning to the streets. "I want to stay with Mrs. Constance," he declared with a firmness surprising for someone so young. Downstairs, Richard faced his own interrogation with a representative from the district attorney's office, who questioned the legality of Gabriel's situation. "Mr. Miles, you have no legal guardianship over the minor," the prosecutor pointed out. "Technically, this constitutes unlawful imprisonment." "I'm in the process of regularizing the situation," Richard defended himself. "I've already hired lawyers specializing in adoption. Gabriel was homeless, abandoned. I gave him a home, education, medical care, and in return, according to the news, you expect him to miraculously heal you." Richard narrowed his eyes, annoyed by the insinuation. "I don't believe the sensationalist press is a reliable source for a representative of the law, sir." After the authorities left, promising to return with a formal decision, Richard called an emergency meeting with his legal and public relations teams. He needed to control the narrative before the situation spiraled completely out of his control. "We'll give an exclusive interview," he decided. "Choose a reputable outlet, preferably a religious journalist who won't ridicule the situation. I want to humanize this story, show that I'm helping Gabriel, not exploiting him." While the team worked on the details of the interview, the atmosphere outside the mansion heated up. Religious groups had set up prayer tents, holding vigils and singing hymns. In contrast, protesters from human rights organizations demonstrated against what they called unlawful confinement of a minor and exploitation of popular faith. The polarization also reached social media and television shows. On Twitter, the hashtag #TonFreeGabriel competed with Charlie Mansion Miracle. On talk shows, experts from all fields debated fiercely. Doctors defended scientific explanations for the cures, psychologists spoke of the power of the mind, religious figures cited biblical passages about spiritual gifts, and lawyers discussed the legal aspects of the case. In her Greenwich Village penthouse, Claudia watched everything with a smile on her lips. The public exposure was exactly what she and Augustus needed to strengthen their petition for a conservatorship over Richard. "This is turning out better than we expected," she commented to Augustus over the phone. "Richard is digging his own grave by exposing this circus." "We still don't know who leaked the story to the press," Augustus replied, "but we should send them flowers." What they didn't know was that the source of the leak was Jordana, the infiltrated maid, who had received an irresistible offer from the journalist Deborah Alvarez. After providing the initial information, Jordana continued to feed the reporter with internal details from the mansion, including the visit from Child Protective Services. 3 days after the news broke, when the crowd in front of the mansion numbered over 200 people, Richard finally agreed to the exclusive interview. The chosen one was Paul Rivers, the host of a Sunday program known for its respectful approach to religious and spiritual topics. The interview took place in the mansion's library. Richard, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, positioned his wheelchair next to an armchair where Gabriel sat, visibly uncomfortable with the cameras. Mrs. Constance remained off camera, but close enough to give the boy a sense of security. "Richard, the whole country wants to know what has really happened since Gabriel came into your life," Paul Rivers began. Richard took a deep breath before answering. "Paul, I was a man without hope. 3 years of unbearable pain, confined to this chair, after doctors from all over the world told me I would never walk again. Then, by chance or perhaps destiny, I met Gabriel." The businessman recounted their first encounter, the boy's spontaneous prayer, the sudden reduction in pain he felt. "I'm not saying it was an instant miracle like in the movies. It was gradual. But today I can go hours without pain medication. I can feel tingling in my legs for the first time in 3 years. My tests show nerve regeneration that doctors can't explain." Gabriel remained silent, his eyes downcast, nervously fidgeting with his hands. When the interviewer finally addressed him, his response was almost inaudible. "I just pray," he whispered, "like my mum taught me before she left." The simplicity of the answer, the boy's evident vulnerability, touched millions of viewers. On social media, the perception began to shift. Many who had previously accused Richard of exploitation were now moved by the story. The interview took an unexpected turn when Paul Rivers asked about Mrs. Constance's recovery. Upon hearing her name, the housekeeper decided to step into the scene despite not being scheduled to participate. "May I speak?" she asked, entering the frame. With Richard's permission, Mrs. Constance sat next to Gabriel, holding his hand. "I was on the verge of departing," she began, using a euphemism so as not to frighten the boy. The doctors had already given up. Then Gabriel came to visit me, put his little hands here, she touched her own chest, and prayed with such faith that I felt something happen inside me. The next morning I was breathing on my own. The tests showed an inexplicable improvement. I have no doubt that it was a miracle. Tears streamed down the housekeeper's face as she spoke. Gabriel moved, hugged her tightly. He is special, Mrs. Constance concluded, not for what he can do, but for who he is, a child with a pure heart in a world that tries to destroy that purity every day. The interview ended with images of Gabriel in the mansion's garden, observing the sky with his telescope, completely oblivious to the media storm his story had created. In the living room of his penthouse, Augustus watched the interview with growing anger. Richard's strategy had worked. Instead of appearing as an exploiter, he emerged as a man transformed by faith and the presence of a special child. "This isn't over," he muttered, picking up the phone. "It's time for Plan B." The day after the interview, as public opinion was divided between support and skepticism, a new report appeared on a less reputable news website. Exclusive: The truth about the miracle boy. Sources reveal $1 million fraud scheme. The article, based on anonymous sources, alleged that Gabriel had been trained by Richard to simulate healing powers as part of an elaborate scam to boost the value of Miles Development shares and attract investment for a new line of energy products. The businessman planned to launch. Although clearly biased and lacking concrete evidence, the report was enough to reignite the controversy. Once again, the Miles mansion was besieged by journalists and onlookers. For Gabriel, the pressure was becoming unbearable. The boy who had known the worst of life on the streets now faced a different kind of violence. Media exposure, prying eyes, impossible expectations to meet. At night, alone in his room, he looked at the stars through his telescope and wondered if it would have been better to remain invisible on the streets of New York, where at least he was free to come and go, without carrying the weight of being considered a living miracle. What Gabriel didn't know was that his greatest test was yet to come, and that the true transformation would not be physical, but spiritual, affecting not only him and Richard, but potentially thousands of other children in situations similar to his. The pressure on the Miles mansion mounted daily. Protesters camped permanently in the vicinity, divided between supporters who saw Gabriel as a divine messenger and critics who accused Richard of exploitation. Journalists tried to bribe staff for exclusive information. Desperate people threw letters over the walls, begging for the healing of sick relatives. Richard's legal team worked tirelessly to regularize Gabriel's situation. The temporary guardianship process was moving forward, but faced bureaucratic hurdles and resistance from the district attorney's office, which demanded more thorough investigations into the boy's past and the businessman's true intentions. Amid the chaos, Richard focused obsessively on his own recovery. The daily sessions with Gabriel became longer and more intense. Medical exams confirmed surprising progress in nerve regeneration, and Richard began to feel spasms in his legs, signs his doctors classified as highly unusual for cases of paraplegia like his. "We are witnessing something unprecedented in medical literature," Dr. Oliver admitted during a private consultation. "I'm not saying it's a miracle, but it certainly defies conventional explanations." For Richard, every small progress fueled his obsession. He had become dependent on Gabriel not just physically, but emotionally. The possibility of walking again, of reclaiming the life he had before the accident, consumed his every thought. What he failed to notice was the effect this pressure was having on Gabriel. The boy became increasingly withdrawn. He ate little, spoke even less. His only refuge was his time with Mrs. Constance and the nighttime hours spent observing the stars through his telescope. On one particularly tense morning, after a sleepless night, caused by nightmares of his life on the streets, Gabriel simply refused to participate in the daily physical therapy session with Richard. "I don't want to anymore," he said, curled up in his bed. "I'm tired." Richard, waiting in his wheelchair in the adapted physical therapy room, received the news with fury. "What do you mean he doesn't want to?" he bellowed at Marshall, his personal assistant who brought the message. "He doesn't have a choice. Go get him immediately." Marshall, a 25-year-old recent business graduate who had been working for Richard for only 6 months, hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, he's just a child. Maybe he's exhausted." "Exhausted? He lives in luxury, has everything a child could ever want. The least he can do is repay me." The words slipped out before Richard could filter them, openly revealing the transactional nature of his relationship with Gabriel. Marshall was visibly uncomfortable. "I'll go speak with him again," the assistant said, hastily retreating. Alone in the room, Richard felt a wave of shame. What was he becoming? When had he crossed the line from benefactor to exploiter? Could the press's accusations, which he so vehemently denied in public, have some truth to them? After a few minutes of turbulent reflection, he made an unusual decision. Waving off Marshall's help, he propelled his wheelchair through the mansion's corridors to Gabriel's room. The boy was sitting by the window, staring blankly at the garden, when Richard knocked softly and entered. Gabriel turned, surprised to see the businessman in his room, something that had never happened before. "May I come in?" Richard asked, though he was already inside. Gabriel nodded silently. Richard moved his chair closer to the window, following the boy's gaze to the garden. Outside, a few butterflies danced among the newly planted flowers, a simple spectacle of nature that seemed to completely capture Gabriel's attention. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Richard commented, trying to establish a connection. "Yes, sir." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Richard realized that despite living under the same roof for months, he hardly knew Gabriel. Their interactions were limited to the healing sessions and the occasional formal, always supervised and artificial meals. "Gabriel, are you unhappy here?" he finally asked. The question surprised the boy, who finally looked directly at Richard. In his childish eyes was a wisdom that only early suffering could produce. "You've never asked me that before," Gabriel observed. The simplicity of the reply hit Richard like a slap. It was true. He had never cared about Gabriel's feelings, only about what the boy could do for him. "I'm asking now," he insisted, genuinely interested for the first time. Gabriel looked back at the garden, at the free butterflies, before answering. "It's better than the street," he said finally. "I'm not hungry, I'm not cold, Mrs. Constance is good to me." "But," Richard sensed there was an implied but. "But I'm not free," Gabriel completed, with surprising articulation for his age. "I feel like a thing, not a person." The words struck Richard deeply. That was exactly how he had treated Gabriel, as an object, a tool for his cure. Never as a child with his own desires, dreams, and needs. "What do you want, Gabriel?" he asked, his voice thick with sudden emotion. "If you could choose anything, what would it be?" Gabriel didn't hesitate. To leave. Those two simple words dealt a devastating blow to Richard's ego. After everything he had offered, material comfort, security, opportunities the boy would never have had on the streets, the only thing Gabriel wanted was to leave him. "To where?" he asked, struggling to maintain his composure. "I don't know," Gabriel admitted with a shrug. "I just wish I could choose. On the street I was hungry, but I could go wherever I wanted. This is a beautiful prison." Richard fell silent, absorbing the impact of those sincere words. Slowly, like tectonic plates shifting, something began to change within him. A fundamental transformation in his view of the world, of Gabriel, and of himself. "I've been selfish," he finally admitted. "I only thought about myself, about my recovery." "You're sick, sir," Gabriel replied with a child's simple logic. "It's normal to want to get better, but not at the expense of someone else, especially a child." They fell silent again, watching the butterflies. One of them, particularly bold, briefly landed on the windowsill before flying away again. "Gabriel, if I let you go, where would you go? Back to the streets?" The boy frowned, considering the question. "I don't know. I don't have anyone." The reality of Gabriel's situation hit Richard with full force. Regardless of his selfish motives, he had taken the boy from a life of constant danger, hunger, and abandonment. To return him to that reality, even in the name of freedom, would be an even greater cruelty. What if? Richard hesitated, an idea forming in his mind. What if we could help other children like you? Children who live on the streets without family, without protection. Gabriel's eyes lit up with genuine interest. How? We could create a place for them. Not a prison, but a real home. With a school, sports, art, a place where they could be real kids, prepared for a better future. You would do that. We would do that, Richard corrected. Together. You understand better than anyone what these children need. For the first time in weeks, Gabriel smiled. Not the polite, forced smile he showed for cameras or visitors, but a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. I'd like that, he said simply. At that moment, something inexplicable happened. Richard felt an intense tingling run down his legs, unlike any sensation he had felt since the accident. Instinctively, he tried to move his right foot, and to his utter astonishment, he succeeded. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was real. "Gabriel," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Look." The boy watched, amazed at the slight movement of Richard's foot under the blanket covering his legs. "You did it." "We did it," Richard corrected, tears streaming freely down his face. "It was when I stopped thinking about myself, when I finally saw you as a person, not an instrument, that I felt it." That revelation marked the beginning of a profound transformation. That very afternoon, Richard called an emergency meeting with his executive and legal teams. To everyone's surprise, he announced the immediate creation of the New Paths Foundation, dedicated to rescuing children from the streets and offering them not just shelter, but real opportunities for development. "I want the best possible team," he instructed, educators, psychologists, social workers. "And I want Gabriel to actively participate in the planning, within the appropriate limits for his age." Of course. While his executives tried to process Richard's sudden shift in priorities, on the other side of the city, Augustus received the news with disbelief. "A foundation for street kids? Richard has finally lost it," he declared to Claudia, who shared his bewilderment. "He's going to throw millions into a charity project with no financial return." "This strengthens our case for the conservatorship," Claudia noted, pragmatic as ever. "We can argue that he's making irrational financial decisions under the boy's influence." What neither Augustus nor Claudia could foresee was that Richard's new venture would capture the public's imagination in a way none of his commercial projects ever had. The story of the powerful businessman who, touched by the innocence of a street boy, decided to change his life to help the less fortunate was irresistible to the media and the general public. At the mansion, the following days were a flurry of activity. The legal team fast-tracked the process for Gabriel's temporary guardianship, now with the prospect of permanent adoption. Architects were hired to design the first New Paths Foundation Center, to be built on a plot of land that Miles Development owned in the Bronx. Richard, energized by his new purpose and the physical progress he continued to experience, spent hours with Gabriel, no longer in healing sessions, but planning what the center should be like to best meet the children's needs. "What do you think is a must-have, Gabriel?" he asked during one of these planning sessions. "A library," the boy answered without hesitation. "On the streets, I'd spend hours in bookstores until they kicked me out. Reading made me forget I was hungry." Richard took notes, genuinely interested in Gabriel's perspective. "What else?" "A place to play that's protected from the rain, and showers with real hot water, and teachers who don't yell when you don't understand something." Each simple suggestion revealed the hardships and challenges Gabriel had faced, touching Richard deeply. The businessman realized he was receiving far more than he was giving, a lesson in humanity that no elite university or MBA could offer. Week after Richard's awakening, the family court granted him temporary guardianship of Gabriel, recognizing the emotional bonds that had formed and the safe environment provided for the boy. The decision was celebrated quietly at the mansion, with a special cake prepared by Mrs. Constance and a promise from Richard. "This is just the beginning, Gabriel. From now on, we will build a better future together, for you and for many other children." The boy, who had arrived at the mansion as a prisoner and was now becoming family, hugged Richard with a spontaneity that surprised them both. "Thank you, Uncle Richard," he said, using a more familiar term for the first time. Richard, moved, realized that the true miracle was not in the physical recovery he was experiencing, but in the spiritual transformation that Gabriel had sparked in his heart, hardened by years of power and loneliness. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Augustus and Claudia prepared their final blow, unaware that the new path Richard had chosen would be not only his personal redemption, but also his protection against the conspiracies that surrounded him. The hearing at the New York County Supreme Court in downtown Manhattan drew national media attention. The case had become emblematic. On one side, Richard Miles, billionaire businessman, a former symbol of ruthless capitalism, now on a philanthropic mission. On the other, his brother Augustus and ex-wife Claudia, alleging that Richard was mentally incapable of managing his business and assets. "My client is clearly under undue influence," argued the lawyer hired by Augustus. "He has abandoned profitable projects to dedicate himself to philanthropic activities with no financial return, based on the supposed miraculous influence of a child. This demonstrates an altered mental state that justifies a conservatorship." Richard's legal team, led by the respected attorney Dr. Esther Caldwell, presented a powerful counter-argument. "Your Honor, philanthropy is not a sign of insanity. Mr. Miles maintains full control over his businesses, as demonstrated by the financial results of Miles' development, which remains stable. The New Paths Foundation merely represents a diversification of his investments to include social impact, something increasingly common among major global business leaders." The judge, Dr. Paul Rivers, coincidentally sharing the name of the TV host who had interviewed Richard and Gabriel months earlier, carefully examined the medical and psychological reports submitted by both parties. "This court sees no evidence whatsoever of mental incapacity," he finally declared. "On the contrary, the evaluations indicate that Mr. Richard Miles is more lucid and emotionally balanced than in previous years. I therefore deny the petition for a conservatorship." The decision was met with restrained applause from Richard's supporters in the courtroom. Augustus and Claudia left quickly, avoiding the journalists who crowded the exit. For Richard, that victory meant much more than simply maintaining control over his fortune. It was the official validation of his transformation and the new mission he had embraced. Upon returning to the mansion, where Gabriel and Mrs. Constance awaited him anxiously, Richard brought more than good news. He brought the determination to definitively sever the toxic ties that bound him to his past. "We won, Gabriel," he announced, entering the living room with a radiant smile. "And now we move forward, without looking back." That same night, Richard made drastic decisions that surprised the financial market and New York society. First, he finalized his divorce from Claudia, giving her a significant sum of money in exchange for her renouncing any future stake in the family businesses. Then he bought out all the shares Augustus held in Miles' development, paying a fair market value, but demanding that his brother step away from the family business completely. "I'm pruning the diseased branches of my life," he explained to Marshall, his personal assistant, who had become a close confidant, "so that new flowers can bloom." The first New Paths Foundation Center was inaugurated 6 months later in an emotional ceremony. The complex in the Bronx included not only comfortable and safe dormitories for 100 children, but also a model school, a library, sports facilities, art studios, and a complete medical center open to the community. Gabriel, now 9 years old, cut the inaugural ribbon alongside Richard, who was able to stand for brief periods with the help of crutches, progress that doctors continued to classify as extraordinary. "I'm not here as a miracle," Gabriel declared, surprising everyone with his eloquence in the short speech he had prepared. "I'm here because I got a chance that many children don't get. Each of us can be a miracle for someone. We just have to see the other person as a person, not a problem." The simple but profound words moved those present. Richard, watching the boy with pride, reflected on how much they had both grown together. He learning to see beyond his own pain and ambition. Gabriel developing his voice and confidence, transforming from a victim into an agent of change. In the following months, the foundation expanded rapidly. A second center opened on the outskirts of Chicago, followed by units in New Orleans, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. The innovative model, which combined immediate shelter with long-term educational and emotional development, attracted the attention of international organizations. Richard restructured Miles' development, directing 30% of its annual profits to the foundation and implementing sustainable construction practices in all new projects. The company, far from losing value as Augustus had predicted, gained new life and purpose, attracting investors interested in businesses with social impact. Gabriel, in turn, flourished. Now legally adopted by Richard, he attended a regular school in the mornings and dedicated his afternoons to additional studies and visits to the foundation's centers. His story inspired other children rescued from the streets, showing them that the past did not have to determine the future. Mrs. Constance remained a constant presence in both their lives, now officially as the wellness coordinator for the Foundation's centers, a position created especially for her, valuing her practical wisdom and natural empathy. As for the antagonists, their fates took different paths. Claudia used the money from the divorce settlement to move to Paris, where she was rarely seen at social events. Augustus, embittered by his defeat, tried to launch competing real estate ventures, but without the Miles surname and the reputation that came with it, he struggled to attract investors. Jordana, the maid who had leaked information to the press, was eventually discovered and fired. However, Richard, in his new spirit of compassion, offered her a second chance as a volunteer at one of the Foundation's centers, an opportunity for redemption that she gratefully accepted. 3 years after their initial encounter on Fifth Avenue, life in the Miles mansion had completely transformed. The once silent corridors now echoed with the laughter of Gabriel and his school friends. Richard, now able to walk short distances with a cane, conducted important meetings in the library, often with Gabriel observing and learning. On one particularly significant afternoon, Richard called Gabriel to his office for a serious conversation. "I have something important to show you," he said, opening a folder with official documents. "I finalized my will yesterday. As my legal son, you will be my primary heir, of course. But I want you to understand my decisions." Gabriel, now 11, nodded with a maturity beyond his years, conferred by his life experiences. 50% of everything I own will go directly to you," Richard explained. "The other 50% will be permanently endowed to the New Paths Foundation, ensuring its continuity no matter what happens." "That's perfect, Dad," Gabriel replied, using the term that still felt strange but comforting to them both. "There's more," Richard continued. "I'm creating a board of trustees for the foundation, including you, Mrs. Constance, Marshall, and other trusted professionals. When you turn 21, you will take over as president, if you so choose." Gabriel fell silent for a few moments, absorbing the weight of the responsibility Richard was planning for him. "What if I'm not good at it?" he finally asked, revealing the natural insecurity of a child facing such great expectations. Richard smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're already good at it, Gabriel. You have something that no MBA or leadership course can teach. You know the pain of those who need help. That makes all the difference." On the 6th anniversary of Richard and Gabriel's first meeting, a special ceremony was held in the mansion's garden. Dozens of children from the various foundation centers were present, along with staff, supporters, and close friends. Richard, now able to stand without support for longer periods, though still relying on a cane to walk, addressed the guests with evident emotion in his voice. 6 years ago, I was a broken man, not just physically but spiritually. I believed my worth was in power, money, and control over others. Then fate placed in my path a boy who taught me the true meaning of strength and dignity. Looking at Gabriel, who was smiling beside Mrs. Constance, Richard continued. "I thought I was saving Gabriel from the streets, but the truth is he saved me from myself. And together, we are trying to save other children, not just from hunger and cold, but from invisibility, that terrible affliction that allows an entire society to pretend not to see the suffering." At its doorstep, the New Paths Foundation had become a national and international benchmark for the care and development of vulnerable children. To date, more than 1,000 boys and girls had passed through its centers, receiving not only temporary shelter, but a complete path to social inclusion, with support into adulthood and placement in the workforce. Gabriel, though still young, had become a symbol of this transformation. Frequently invited to speak at events and conferences, he spoke with simplicity and authenticity about his experience, always refusing the miracle worker status that some insisted on attributing to him. "The only miracle that exists is compassion," he would always repeat. "When we truly see one another, everything can change." The question of his supposed healing gift remained a mystery. Richard's extraordinary recovery continued to defy conventional medical explanations, as did Mrs. Constance's. Other people who had contact with Gabriel also reported inexplicable improvements in chronic conditions. Scientists and theologians debated the phenomenon without reaching definitive conclusions. Gabriel himself maintained a humble position on the matter. "If something good happens when I pray, the glory belongs to God, not me. I'm just a boy who learned to believe that things can get better, even when everything seems impossible. Richard, for his part, had found a peace that transcended the physical issue. Although he would never fully recover the movement in his legs, the significant improvement allowed him a quality of life he had not thought possible after the accident. More importantly, he had found a purpose greater than any previous business achievement. "Some call what happened to my legs a miracle," he once commented to a journalist. "I call what happened to my heart a miracle." On a special afternoon, while Richard and Gabriel were planting trees in the mansion's garden, a new annual tradition they had created, the businessman asked a question that had long intrigued him. "Gabriel, do you remember our first meeting? What made you stop at my car specifically, among so many at the traffic light that day?" The boy reflected for a few moments, his hands still dirty with soil. "I saw your eyes through the glass," he replied simply. "They looked sad, like mine. I thought we needed each other." Richard smiled, marveling at the intuition of the child who, without knowing it, had changed not just one life, but an entire legacy. The story of Richard and Gabriel inspired change beyond the walls of the mansion and the foundation's centers. Business leaders across the United States began to rethink their social responsibility strategies. Public authorities were pressured to improve policies for homeless children. Society, once indifferent, began to see a problem that had always been visible but conveniently ignored. The real transformation, however, happened quietly day after day in the small gestures between Richard and Gabriel. In the homework, help the businessman offered every night, in the stories they told each other before bed, in the discussions about the foundation's future, in the small arguments and reconciliations that every real family experiences. From a ruthless businessman to a devoted father, from an abandoned boy to an agent of change, both had traveled extraordinary journeys that converged at a singular point of light and hope. Years later, when asked about the secret to the success of the New Paths Foundation, Gabriel, by then a young adult leading the project's international expansion, would answer with the wisdom that had characterized him since childhood. "There is no secret. We just learn to see the invisible, to believe in the impossible, and to love unconditionally. The rest is a consequence." And in those simple words lay the entire essence of a story that began with an unlikely encounter at a Fifth Avenue traffic light and culminated in the transformation of thousands of lives across the United States, proof that sometimes true miracles are not found in instant cures or supernatural events, but in the profound change that occurs when one human heart truly opens to another. As Mrs. Constance liked to say, with the wisdom of her more than 70 years, the greatest miracle is not making a paralyzed man walk, but making a hardened heart feel again. And that, my children, happens every day, right under our noses, if we have the grace to know how to see it. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Gabriel and Richard has touched your hearts. Just as the boy from Washington Square Park transformed the life of the powerful businessman, perhaps this story can also inspire small changes in how we see the world. To discover other moving narratives like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have a special playlist with stories of overcoming adversity and redemption waiting for you. And if this story sparked something special in you, share it with us in the comments. After all, every story gains new life when it finds a heart willing to welcome it. Until our next meeting.